Hello, Wellspring. We're tackling our January 18th reading. We're still in the book of Genesis, and we're continuing with the story of Joseph. The last place we had left off is that his brothers had sold him into slavery and lied about his cloak. They kind of ripped it up and then they covered it in goat's blood and told Jacob that Joseph had been killed by a wild animal. And Jacob is grieving. But now we're going to pick back up with Joseph. He had been sold into slavery to the Egyptians, and we'll hear more from his story. So we're in Genesis chapter 39. I'll be reading from the NIV, and here we go. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph, so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of the Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything that he owned. From the time he put him in charge of the household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care, with Joseph in charge. He did not concern himself with anything except the food that he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in the house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that his cloak was in her hand and he had run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew's been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." She kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. Then she told him this story. "That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me, but as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." When his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me," he burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden, so that the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. So a couple of the highlights that jump out for me in this story is, first of all, Joseph resists temptation. And it's interesting that at first Joseph has the cloak of many colors torn off of him because his pride fueled the anger and fueled the frustration that his brothers had felt. And then they moved to a space where they tore his cloak off of him, sold him to the Ishmaelites, right? Like we read about yesterday. But this time Joseph is acting in humility. Though he's a slave, though he's imprisoned, he is acting with integrity and dignity, and everything that he touches, God blesses. And there's something interesting that's happening here that I think we should pay attention to, is that Joseph is doing everything as if it was for God. He's living in a place with a bunch of integrity in spite of his circumstances. And I think about how many of us have jobs or have situations where perhaps the person above us is an Egyptian slave master, right? Perhaps the person above us is Potiphar or even Potiphar's wife, and there would be a temptation to give the least amount of effort or not to honor the Lord in the way that we work or how we go about our business. But Joseph demonstrates to us in the middle of this hardship, in the middle of this brokenness, he still chooses to honor the Lord in the way he acts, in the way he behaves, in the work that he does, and in the effort that he puts in. And God blesses it. And because of that, God blesses Potiphar's whole household, right? Everything Potiphar has is being blessed because of Joseph. Potiphar takes notice of this. Joseph gets elevated, right? And there's just a couple things that I think we can take hold of. One is we ought to be like that. We ought to live with integrity and work hard and do everything that we can to honor the Lord, even in a situation where perhaps our boss is Potiphar, right? And simultaneously, to the outside world, they might look at that and go, wow, Potiphar's life is really blessed. Potiphar must be doing everything perfectly. Potiphar must be a great man. And in reality, the blessing that's falling on Potiphar's household is due to Joseph. And so sometimes when we ask, why do good things happen to the wicked people, or why are wicked people blessed? We might not know exactly what God is doing in that space. It might be that God is blessing one of his servants who is silently and quietly working with integrity and dignity, and who is honoring God in all that they do underneath the headship of someone who perhaps isn't pursuing God or doing the things that they ought to be doing. So we shouldn't always be too quick or too hasty to judge how blessing is being poured out and how God chooses to share that and why God chooses to share it in the way that he does. So we need to take notice of that. One, sometimes if we look at a situation and it looks one way, there might be something else happening there underneath based off what God is doing. And two, we should be like Joseph and live with integrity in all situations, looking to honor Jesus in our work and in our dignity and in our humility, rather than honoring ourselves, or perhaps even trying to dishonor the person we work for, the company we work for. I know that's a hard thing, and it's not always easy to do that, particularly if you have a harsh boss, or you have a boss that isn't honoring the Lord, or if you have a boss that pushes you in a direction that you don't want to go. But God will bless your integrity. God will bless your diligence. God will bless your hard work. If you just stay faithful to him and stay committed to lifting him up, and do everything as if you're doing it unto Christ. The other thing that I kind of started talking about was this idea that Potiphar's wife is coming after Joseph, and day after day she tries to convince him to come to bed with her. And there's a really interesting statement that it says Joseph would not go sleep with her, but not only that, he wouldn't even be with her. He was avoiding temptation at all costs. He understood, I'm a human being and I could slip, I could have a bad day or make an error, so I'm not even going to allow myself to be close to the temptation. So even though I don't want to do that, and I'm choosing not to do that, and I'm resisting temptation, I don't want to be anywhere near the temptation. And so Joseph shows us that he stays as far away from the line as possible. And often there's times where, as Christians, it might be permissible for us to do something, or it might be permissible for us to go to a place, or it might be okay for us to come up to this point and stop, and it's not sin, right? But when we keep coming up to this point and coming up to this point and coming up to this point, the odds of us slipping over into sin is greater and greater and greater. And Joseph demonstrates to us this way of avoiding it by not even getting close. He won't even be in the room with her. He won't even be in the house with her. He avoids her. He avoids the temptation. He stays as far away as possible within the circumstances that he has. And then, yet, she still lies about him, and she takes advantage of a moment where probably she planned, to have all the servants out of the house, where she thought, okay, I can get Joseph like this. And we can put this underground. We can make it a secret, and then Joseph will sleep with me. But Joseph runs from her, and then she concocts this lie. And so now Joseph ends up in another situation where it looks like everything's going wrong for him. And Potiphar takes him and he throws him in prison. But Joseph maintains his integrity. Joseph maintains his humility. Joseph continues to honor God even now as a prisoner under an Egyptian warden, right? And so now here he is, having been a slave and been honored and then been lied about, having been a son and then been rejected by his family, rejected by his brothers, and sold into slavery. And now he's in prison, and yet he's operating with this incredible holiness, right? He's doing the things that he should do, and he's honoring God in the steps that he's taking. And even the Egyptian warden of the prison sees this and begins to elevate Joseph until Joseph is in charge of all the prisoners. And Joseph gets elevated in this space because God's hand is on him, and God is blessing him in the middle of his turmoil, in the middle of the hardship, right? And I just think there's things for us to hold on to there, to take into account, to think about. And so I would just encourage you, Wellspring. If you're in a tough work situation, if you're in a difficult situation where it feels like, man, my bosses don't care, or it feels like this company is X, Y, or Z, the best thing we can do as a Christ follower to be a witness for Christ in that space is to walk in holiness, to do everything as if we're doing it for Jesus and unto Jesus. And Jesus will receive that as an act of worship, as an act of praise. That is living your life in a radical call to holiness. That is walking out your Christian faith in a way that's meaningful, and it will impact people. It may take a little time for someone to recognize, or for people to recognize, and some people might never recognize that it is God that you are honoring, that it is God who you are lifting up. But God sees it, and God knows. And remember, we don't store up treasures on earth where rust and moths and thieves can destroy and steal. We're storing up treasures in heaven that we can then give back to God to say thank you for everything you've given to us. Be encouraged this week. Flee from temptation. Stay as far away from the line as you can. And honor the Lord in all that you do, Wellspring. God bless you.